oh, I've never actually witnessed this side of what you do, making a record. I've never seen one made, and how about if I hang out with a camera? And Lee said, sure, that could be interesting. And he was really just starting. I don't think you really knew where you were going on this album. I didn't know where I was going filmically because I didn't know what they were going to do. And I realized early in the process that they were doing something incredible. And I had to figure out a way to, with Jerry, to represent that and engage viewers in that process. And fortunately, they were amazing. So it was kind of easy for me. It was, it was a challenge, but fortunately, it was an amazing piece of music. And with Jonathan and Alan and Raul and Lee and Sharon and all these incredible people and Nels Klein, it was really a gift for me to find that process and that energy. I don't know if you want to respond to that.
What was the question?
How did you make this incredible experience for us? I mean, you were making it for yourselves because you're just making the album, but you were somehow aware. I don't know if there were any conversations about how can you materialize in film that kind of creative process, being in the moment, but also seeing the bigger picture of where the song was going, like the relationship with the words and how you own them, yeah.
I mean, a lot of it is kind of addressed in the film, but when Raul and I met a few years ago and we decided at some point we wanted to work on a new record of original material together, and we really didn't know where it was going to lead us when we started. We didn't know it was going to be this year-long process of working together and that we were going to have such an interesting time doing it, and just this whole idea of the collaborative nature of something like this, working with Raul on all the music and at some point asking Jonathan if he would collaborate with me on some of the lyrics. And, like Fred said, he said early on, I don't have any idea how a record is made. Can I come for a day or two? Not knowing it was going to end up being a year later that we wrapped the project. But, after a day or two, he was such a fixture in the studio that we really just kind of got on with our work. We didn't really think about the fact that we were on camera, as evidenced by a lot of the goofy scenes of me in particular in the film. Just, we were just kind of going about our business, and he was filming us.
They only noticed me at mealtime.
But that's kind of like the magic of it. And then I think, Raul, you're a great narrator in this as well. And
You think so?
Yeah, and
I think so.
very much so. And then not only a narrator of your own creative process and how this project, this album was evolving, but also bringing a lot of people that are not familiar with the creative process of making an album and musicians into the conversation. So, yeah,
Well,
what was it?
I love to talk about the creative process. I think it's very interesting, not only in terms of music, in terms of behavior, and how I was talking, I don't know if with Jerry during the dinner before we came here, that for me, making music, it's super important. But to meet people and make music together, it's even better. I don't know, to find someone with whom you can do a record like this, like what we've done together with Lee, and find moments where you feel you are completely together, another than not, but you find a place where you feel comfortable. That's incredible. And you get to places where you would never imagine you would go. That's super interesting.
If I could just say that the thing about the surrealist collaboration, just like everyone's not in the same room, and I think there's something about the surrealist got about the purity of the viewer's experience that you can have just being very mindful in the moment by combining several people, like the Exquisite Corpse is the classic example. But in this case, the contributions flew in from different places, so there wasn't really that kind of team group approach, but at least as an editor putting it together, the beauty of it was just seeing how layer upon layer you made something that no individual really could have conceived. Although, Lee is obviously the auteur of the whole project, but the way the collaboration worked, there were all these new things and new ideas that just created these really exciting things. And that's what this is not usually the kind of music that I'm interested in, but when Fred showed me the footage of it, it just I just fell in love with what I saw happening creatively.
Also, maybe you can talk a little bit, Jonathan, about the lyrics, and I just really love how open you are about just pulling things out of the drawer from 25 years ago, and having this these obsessions in your mind, and suddenly those things find their magical right place because you own them and you make them yours and you shake them up. And also, both of you, to want to be able to own someone else's words and someone else's lyrics, and you being able to just be so generous also to go, yeah, here it is, and you're cutting it up, and great, this is looking better. That kind of generosity that all of you've had with things that were usually, or people are usually as artists very, very protective.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I'm fundamentally. I mean, it was a joke with the dinner that I should have been sitting at a separate table in the dinner because I'm like there but not there.
You were missing all the fun. I was feeling
I'm
sorry.
elsewhere, and it's this kind of wonderful, permanent, vicarious position for a writer who's not a musician to be invited to touch this process in any way. And I've had this over and over again. I've gotten to interview musicians, and including heroes of mine. And I've gotten to write lyrics for a few different musicians, including heroes. And you're almost always, stuck in the position of the fan who's been, allowed to kind of be involved in a way. So there was no question of vanity or possession for me. It was more like I was just getting to reach through a membrane that's normally I'm on the outside, I guess I do think of it as it was a form of play. Fundamentally, it was just a form of play, which is, I try to entertain that spirit in anything I write still, even my own big turgid novels. But this especially just reminded me to abandon any sense of overarching structure or ego, or it's just sort of like, what can I do? I've been invited to like tickle these sounds with language, but also, I mean, as I say in the film, Lee had plenty of language of his own. I mean, it's like Dylan inviting Jacques Levy to write it's weird because Dylan has a lot of language, and you had loads of it, and so sometimes I was also just like it was like being a filmic collaboration. I was the editor. I was taking found objects and changing them, or trying to improve them, or just or sometimes just presenting them to you back, giving them my kind of like validation. Yeah.
How was it for you?
Well, I mean, watching the movie was at first, I've seen it a couple of times now, and at first it was strange to just see everything out of order, because I'm used to just doing one track at a time, like you're spending a few hours in the studio on one track, and then it would kind of be like darting you between all these different songs, although I knew all the songs by the time I saw the film. But the whole process was, I'm probably the one person that's on this record that was on the other two Lee Ranaldo records before this, and they've all been completely different. The first one, I think I just came in one day and put down my parts, and then the second one, I was there every day for 2 or 3 months, probably because that was more of a band record. And then this one was kind of in between, where I came in for a couple of days to do parts, and then also was there some of the time just sort of observing and making some comments and consulting a little bit. And then also was very involved in listening to mixes and sequencing and things like that. So, and it was sort of the thing that was like the exact opposite of the record before, like Lee says in the movie, which, that's sort of a great position to be in, where you have the freedom to kind of do something completely different from the last thing if you want to, where no one's saying like, hey, we need another carbon copy of your smash hit album, otherwise, our families are going to go hungry this winter or something. It's like, well, that's true, because Sony was like counting on Michael Jackson, for like certain financial quarters, which is true. So it's great to be part of the process in all these different ways and have it come out so unique in each case.
Well, I don't know. I mean, we kind of saw the film grow over time, and we spent so long working on this record, on and off, because Raul was flying back and forth from Barcelona at the beginning, and I was going there at the end. But I think the film just kind of consolidated this year-long process into a, even if it's fragmented, as Alan was saying, like jumping around, just, I don't know, I think it kind of emphasized this notion of collaboration. Now, this is not a band record. This is a record that's made like very studio-centric and one layer at a time, with Raul and I in the studio pretty much every day, and then various people coming in, Alan more than most of the others, and, you know, working on the lyrics with Jonathan. It was, you know, I like the idea that music can be a collaborative process, and so the film kind of opens up like a lot of, you know, like peels back some of the layers in the way this film was done collaboratively. You know, it wasn't the typical, you know, you never get the payoff of seeing a band playing a track or anything like that, which is kind of, I guess, more standard for a film like this. But this film wasn't constructed that way. So when Fred first came in and said he wanted to film, it didn't occur to me that we were, you know, going down this road of a very different process to, for instance, what I'm normally used to doing, which is, like Alan said, you know, a band in a room, you rehearse the songs for a few months until everybody's got their parts, and then you put the microphones up and make a recording. And this was more exploratory, both between Jonathan and I on the language side of it, and between Raul and I in terms of what each of these songs could be. And, you know, I think one of the interesting things, even though there's a lot of the same people playing on it, when you listen to a record made by a band, there's a kind of unity between all the tracks, you know, because there's the same people playing on every one. But because we didn't have a band, we were free to treat every single song differently. So in a way, there's almost no two songs on the record that sound similar to each other. They each have their own, they're each like little individuals in a way. That was interesting too, because it's, for me, it's a atypical way of working.
I was going to say that on the film, something that I can say, maybe because I've been so much inside all the process, it's that how we started without almost knowing each other, and at the end, at least I can say I know what Lee's expecting from me, and the opposite. And we were talking the other day about the idea of being the same team working in the next album, and I was thinking that this film, it's super interesting, but I think that when you could listen, you will be able to listen to the next material. Maybe it will be even more interesting, because it's like the starting point. Yeah, I feel like that.
Well, I think it's interesting that these two people are just meeting tonight for the first time, which I think is, you know, that's symbolic of this whole, or stands in for this whole thing.
You know, I'm just going to build on one thing you said, which is, and just hearing Lee just say this thing, which is so true about the record, but I hadn't quite identified it, which is that the songs, in a way, it's a new project for each song. And that was actually, without it ever being a stated plan, it was something we fumbled into. It was very true of the particular collaboration between us on the lyrics, which is that the procedure for arriving at the lyrics, I feel like there's 6 songs that we collaborated on. And in each one, we had to reinvent what the procedure would be. We never had a system. I would get a piece of music, or I would get a sheet of language from Lee, or I would send him a chunk of something, or I would, or the one that couplet. But every time it was like a new kind of way of working together. You know, as if we couldn't rely on any precedent or comfortable. You know, there were no presuppositions about it.
It was like making 9 little movies, or however you would want to call it. You know, our collaboration literally took a different tact on every song, from verses by Jonathan, choruses by me, to a couple, maybe one where I had most of the lines filled in and I just was stumbling on a couple things. And then, you know, we would get into these discussions like over email, because Jonathan was in California most of the time and we were here. You know, you got a line with, you need one word at the end. We would try 10 or 15 different words, and then try and, you know, they all kind of worked, but it wasn't until you found the right one that you said, okay, now we don't have to deal with this anymore. It's like, what made this word right when this word worked fine? But it was, you know, just like a little investigation into the way language works in a song form, which was very interesting to me. Or, you know, in other cases, like Jonathan said, I'd give him a sheet where there needed to be 40 lines, and I'd have 3, and he'd send it back to me the next day with every other one filled in, and then we'd go back and forth, you know, redlining, changing, adding, subtracting. So it was a really interesting process, and I think that collaborative nature between Raul and I on the music you know, as well as all the other musicians, obviously. And Jonathan and I, you know, I worked in a band that was very super collaborative for 30 years. And when I started making these kind of records on my own, I mean, at first it's like, you know, if you're a singer-songwriter or whatever term you want to use, it's kind of like being a painter in a studio. You know, you're isolated and you're trying to make it all come out of your own self. And for this record, I wanted to open it up to really strong collaborations again, because music is such a social form to begin with. And like Ken said, you know, musicians have their own perspective on things that's different from a writer or a painter or a filmmaker. You know, I wanted to bring a lot more of those people into the mix on creating this stuff. And, you know, the original ideas were loose enough to allow that to happen, I think.
There's some fantastic moments that I love, just about, because, you know, as a lover of music, you fall in love with certain lyrics or certain songs and the way they're sung, and you're like, wow, I wonder what must he been thinking when he did this. And then suddenly we see you, and, you know, Raul is going like, no, I want you a bit more crazy, like if you're in a mental institution, and you grab your neck and you're like struggling yourself a little bit, and then those amazing vocals come out, and you're like, fuck, that's how he did it, you know. And how would we ever know that, you know? And those kind of like, you know, moments that come out of the ether of magic and collaboration are just like little gems. And, you know, it was great that you were there and we were, you know, we're able to see that. So please make films in every album that you do, so we can see it. Yeah, magic is there. One last question.
Yeah, I mean, very simply, as you watch the way Lee and Raul and the other people involved in making the album work, it was a very nonlinear process, and things happened in spurts and then came together later on. And I think Jerry found his way once I dumped, you know, a year's worth of footage on him, that he discovered on his own, in a way, what was happening in the studio with the music and the creation of the songs. And then we stuck to that plan. Like, we decided it wasn't a linear process at all, and we wanted to sort of find our way and then find ways to have the audience actually hear what we were finding, which led to those Pro Tools sequences, those colored sequences that are very abstract, which, you know, take you out of the movie, in a sense, and make you listen to the movie and make you listen to the songs. And a lot of that was really Jerry looking at things I'd spent a year shooting and then putting aside and then, you know, finding his way. And Lee was part of that process a lot of the time. You know, we were talking to him, he was seeing what we were doing. He actually made a lot of those Pro Tools scenes with us. We sat in my kitchen, you know, just pumping up what you can do with Pro Tools and getting all those colors. And I think we just had a really good time trying to find our way to the, not to say to mimic the way the album was made, but in a similar sort of parallel way to make this movie that looked like the way the music was being made, or the joy that I found in the way they were making the music.
Yeah, and particularly it being, you know, it's not a classic Hollywood film where you have the establishing of it and you create the conflict and then you resolve it at the end. It was not going to be that kind of film. I mean, first of all, everyone just got along too well, so there wasn't really enough conflict in there. Disagreement over drum tracks is probably not the greatest conflict you've seen in a movie before. But I think that was kind of the challenge, is to find a way to using the material that was there to create scenes and a structure that were different from, you know, the kind of building up tension within it. And, you know, and it also was new. I mean, I worked on short form, but this is the first time I've ever worked on a feature. So, we had a friend who consulted, who helped a little bit, but it's sort of like filmmaking 101. Well, filmmaking maybe 201 or something like that. But I mean, just figuring out how to put things into scenes, even though it's not that obvious what the scenes are, and being able to build those scenes into some kind of structure. You know, trying to do it in a new way that hopefully people would be paying attention, and there'd be unusual edits and also unusual juxtapositions of sound and music, so that, you know, you got jarred out of, you didn't get lulled into. You know, it's really a mindfulness exercise, I guess.
We really needed a fist fight or a murder or something.
Well, we had some cadavers and like submarines lost in the Sea of China. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We have to unfortunately wrap it up here, but it was an incredible experience to watch it in my big screen at home, and it was even better to watch it here with you guys. Thank you so much for making this film, for showing it to us. Thank you for coming.